we'll go ahead and we'll just dive into it here because we're right on time to kind of start. So if you're joining us on YouTube, thank you again for being here with us today for our very first live reInvent recap. Of course, Datadog had a ton of great announcements during the week of reInvent, which we're gonna just kind of walk through some of those. But like, really, I'm just curious to kick things off from both of you. Like, could you one introduce yourself and tell us what your role was at reInvent, and then two, what do you think was one of the themes um, that you kind of observed from this year's reInvent content? We'll start with Tara.
Great. Hi, everyone. My name is Tara. I work at Datadog on our customer education and training team, developing training content and training labs centered on our cloud security product suite. So it's a super fun job. And this was my first reInvent. I conned my way into going and I had such a good time. So I was there to work with our friend Jim to host our security themed AWS Game Day Quest, which was a blast. And I'm sure Jim will talk more about that. One thing I think I observed as a theme at reInvent is it really seemed like um, a lot of the keynotes, a lot of what I saw in the expo, there was a lot of excitement just kind of around the joy in building and the joy in the developer experience. And I totally bought into the hype. Like, as we talk about some of the releases that were rolled out today, I'm so excited to get back into my environment and try stuff out. So I think there was just a lot of like, let's have fun developing and building in the cloud was a theme I picked up on for sure.
Awesome, Jim. You want to introduce yourself to the folks?
Hey, I'm Jim. I'm on the AWS Game Day team, and I believe this was the 7th year that Datadog has sponsored our game day at reInvent, which is super cool. Um, but yeah, Tara and I worked on making the security focused game day, or quest rather, for the game day this year, and it was super awesome. Got to touch a lot of really great Datadog tools that I hadn't seen before, and yeah, overall themes, I'd agree with that assessment that it's really focused toward enabling the builders to easily create prototype things like that. So like you have things like Code Whisper, Party Rock, which is a super cool way to just create some generative AI content really fast. So a lot of cool stuff like that.
Yeah, we're going to talk a lot about, or a little bit during this, about Party Rock and kind of how cool and interesting that is. But before we get into that, both of you kind of picked up themes that I thought were pretty relevant from reInvent, which are that developer experience, just kind of making it easier for people to build and deploy on the AWS cloud, and kind of also no code stuff was one of the things that I thought it was interesting to see as a focus, because really what we're doing is we're breaking down barriers to other folks making software. If you don't come from a computer science background, or you didn't take a boot camp to learn to code, you can still build stuff, which I think is great. Also, security, of course, was a big theme at reInvent. We're going to talk about just a couple of the interesting announcements from the security side. But really, I think what we're seeing is all the cloud providers, not just AWS, trying to make security more accessible and kind of take more of that shared responsibility model from the customer and shift that into cloud provider land. So that's kind of one of the more interesting things I think that we're seeing. Just to let everybody know that's on the YouTube, we did publish our reInvent recap today on the Datadog blog. So if you want to check that out, you certainly can. We'll go ahead and throw the URL in the chat. But this is the blog here that sort of captures some of these themes, investing in all the layers of generative AI, making security accessible, developer experience, and observability enhancements. But I'm just curious from both of your perspective. Tara was your first reInvent. Jim, did you say it was your 7th?
Not my 7th, it was my 5th.
It was your 5th.
And 7th with Datadog sponsoring a game day quest, I think.
That's it, yeah. My numbers may be a little off, but it's close to that.
It felt like attendance was up this year. Everything was just packed, and it was really nice to see people out and enjoying kind of the expo hall, and you can really see in this picture front and center on the blog how really busy just the expo hall was, and the hallways were packed again for the first time in a couple of years.
Yeah, it was really nice. This was the first year that our developer relations folks ran the events, the game day events at reInvent, and attendance was really high. It was awesome to see, you know.
Yeah. For the folks that don't know what the game day is, could you just tell us like what is a game day?
Yeah, yeah. Game day is really it's a hands-on learning experience. We group folks into teams of 4, and then we have some like real-world scenarios where they solve issues that they would potentially encounter in the real world. So it's basically a safe space to learn and explore, and figure things out with your team. Make friends, and it's generally a pretty good time. But yeah, what we like to do is have like ambiguous challenges that the participants have to solve together, you know, versus like something like a workshop where you're guided through it. Game day is super ambiguous, so you don't really, you know, have directions on what to do. You kind of got to figure it out, and we try to make the solutions, like you don't have to actually like the solutions or the problems have multiple ways to solve. So we try to keep it open ended a bit.
And one thing I learned in my first experience developing the quest with Jim this year is sometimes the players will think of a way to solve the challenge in front of them in a way you never even imagined that they would. So it's cool, even as the developer, you learn a lot from watching them go through the game day quest. And it's always super fun to make one security themed because you can really get into the scenario and you can have hackers attacking them. And just when they think they've figured it out, the hacker comes back. And I would kind of create the base of the challenge, and then Jim always like cranked up the meanness dial a little bit higher, made that attacker even more devious. But the folks really seemed to like that when we were playing the game day on Wednesday at reInvent.
That's one thing we try to incorporate, like chaos events. So like maybe you think you solved the challenge, but like the actual like attack vector is still in place. So like, yeah, I fixed my website, but you didn't fix it permanently. You only, so the attacker's still in there doing stuff. So it's a lot of fun.
Yeah, and the game days are kind of far from the other stuff, but it's really nice to see it packed. So I think people know that the game days are all the way at Mandalay now, and it was just a huge room, huge session. Nice to see the tables full. So yeah, looking forward to doing more of those. But without further ado, let's get into the announcements from reInvent, because I think that there were just a ton of great announcements, and this was kind of the year of LLMs and generative AI in general. So of course that was one of the biggest themes at reInvent, but not kind of in the way that I expected. So we talked a little bit about Party Rock, and which I'm really excited about. Does one of you want to summarize kind of like what is Party Rock?
I can give a quick example of something cool I saw with it, if that's okay.
Sure.
One of my teammates just, over the course of like maybe 20 minutes, created an app where you could you describe an alien, then it makes a picture of the alien, and then it has a chat window where you can talk to the alien, which was super cool. Like I don't think he did very much, or if any, code at all to get the application going. So I thought that was really neat. Just a quick way to get hands-on with generative AI to do stuff and get a taste for it.
That's awesome. I kind of think if folks haven't seen the Party Rock UI, to go in and kind of play around, have that playground with Bedrock. Correct me if I'm wrong, Jim, but I think that's the description. It kind of goes back to that theme we were talking about at the beginning, because Party Rock, you open it and it's fun. Like, it's colorful, it's fun, it's walking you through. Maybe if you don't have a lot of experience coding or with computer science concepts, it's walking you through in very human language how to get started building something. So I never thought of talking with an alien, but I have a lot of ideas maybe over the holidays of stuff I want to go in there and try and mess with. But again, it's just like the joy of building in the cloud. It gives that vibe.
I think the coolest thing about it, aside from the fact that it's just really fun to build in, and I think was this a Midnight Madness launch? Did it come out on Monday night as part of the party, like the first party?
I'm not sure.
Yeah, I'm not actually sure. I think it might have been less. My days are all still a little mixed together from coming back from reInvent, but it might have been the week before.
Okay,
But,
it was a pre-invent launch, and I pre-invent some of the most exciting time of the year because they just can't squeeze everything into the week. So I think this year was very pre-invent launch heavy. There was just tons of stuff rolling out really slowly all the way up to reInvent, which is always great to see that it's not a cliff. It's more of a like an on-ramp to the even bigger announcements. But Party Rock is one of the very first services that AWS has ever launched that you don't have to sign up for an AWS account in order to use.
Yeah.
And that's huge because it just tears down every single accessibility barrier to getting hands-on with this super cool new tech stack. Because I think putting in a credit card, as a builder, as a first-time user, is often, kind of daunting if you don't know what you're going to spend.
Oh yeah, they can be a little scary.
Yeah, so it's really nice to see this have a free tier that is 100% accessible. One of the other big themes, and not just for Party Rock, but for everything in Bedrock, was kind of putting in more security guardrails into those platforms to kind of prevent abuse. And I think this is going to be an interesting topic, as things sort of evolve, like what the arms race looks like for generative AI and what people can and can't use it for on top of cloud providers. I don't know if you have thoughts in the audience, if you're live and you have a specific question or a specific thought about generative AI, feel free to throw it in the YouTube chat. We're keeping an eye on that. And then of course we had Graviton 4 announced, which I think is really exciting to to see kind of the evolution of the Graviton family. Either you excited about Graviton?
I'm not super knowledgeable on that one, to be honest.
I think it's a like you said, it's an evolution. Like it keeps getting better and better. I remember working with the Datadog when Graviton first came out to move some stuff over to the Graviton platform, mostly for like cost optimization and things like that. So I think it'll just keep getting better.
Yeah, this is one of those things I think that people don't really necessarily always think about when they're going from one processor architecture to another, how important it actually is to have an observability platform to kind of monitor when you do migrate a workload from one kind of tried and true and it's been around set of systems to something like Graviton. Some things might surprise you, right? And we actually gave a talk on that last year about Datadog's move to Graviton and some of the things that were surprising that you can look up from last year's reInvent. Jason E gave that talk, and I learned a lot just watching it about how challenging it can be to move processor architectures. And I think one of the things that people don't talk about when they talk about Graviton is not just the performance aspect, but also kind of the power consumption aspect of Graviton, that it's actually a much lower power, much greener platform.
That was kind of something interesting. I don't know if you both watched, I'm not sure which keynotes you had a chance to watch. I know it's kind of impossible to watch all of them straight through, but in Dr. Werner Vogel's keynote, something interesting he was talking about was how he believes cost can be a good proxy metric for sustainability. So your compute costs kind of being something you can use to indirectly measure sustainability as you are building. I thought that was kind of interesting. I'd never thought of it that way before.
It'd be cool to see a sustainability dashboard or something inside a platform like Datadog for people, kind of moving from one architecture to another, like how much are you actually saving? Because cloud cost management, of course, it wasn't one of the themes that popped out at reInvent. There was no big reveal for cloud costs, but I know it continues to be a focus for everybody.
Yeah, I think the big reveal for cloud cost, I'm going to get my terminology wrong here, but there's going to be a new centralized hub in the AWS console. So I think where two things were separate before, they'll now be brought together. So I've seen some of the cloud cost nerds pretty excited about that. And I do identify as a cloud cost nerd. So that's what I mean by that term.
So moving on, because we're just about through the first third here. Let's talk about some of the security announcements from reInvent, because security always doesn't get a ton of attention at reInvent. I think that's natural and normal, and we don't want to have a ton of security announcements necessarily, because if we do, it means that there's gaps to close, right? And I think that over the last several years, we've really seen, kind of a maturity in a lot of the platform. It's more just about kind of how do we detect dangerous conditions. I don't know if either of you followed that new Access Analyzer APIs, but I'm super excited about the two new Access Analyzer features.
I think they're from what I know of them, I think they're pretty powerful and very useful. I think particularly the use case where maybe you have some of your IAM entities scoped appropriately at one point, but then things change in your environment, right? And so maybe the scope is not so appropriate anymore. To have automation built in there to alert you of that is really cool. And I think it's going to solve a lot of real world problems that people might not even know they have yet.
We initially had built a task in our game day quest based on the Datadog Access Analyzer to try to find roles that were overly permissive, which is super cool. And I think my favorite thing about that was, and I never saw this before, inside of Datadog, there's a fix this in AWS button where you click it and it takes you right to where you need to go, which was just like, hey, this is great. It's like,
if you're not familiar with that Jim just mentioned of the releases from Datadog during reInvent, that's the thing that we call our CIEM product, which you would think is pronounced SIM, but it's really pronounced CIM, because there's already SIMs in security. And this is a great way to visualize your identity risk for production workloads. But the AWS Access Analyzer launched these two new APIs, and I think it's really cool, the two features that they added on in that free product, which let you check your IAM policies before they actually end up in production. So you can check either, does this IAM policy that I'm going to apply give this specific permission? So it's a permissions check, like a gut check API. That's what I call it. But the second one is does it give a potentially dangerous set of permissions to that thing? And I don't know how familiar our audience is, or how familiar either of you are with how challenging that problem is, but every service team at AWS, just like because of the way that the cloud is architected, it doesn't follow a standard set of IAM verbs, right? Like it might be get in one service and read in another and describe in another. And so creating that concrete list of, hey, this is a permission that I can grant that might allow somebody to privilege escalate, that has to be a discrete, maintained list. So I'm super interested to know how it works and see more deep dives.
And correct me if I'm wrong, Andrew, but I believe that's also where it can alert you easily to permissions that are assigned to entities outside of your own account, right? So that's kind of what I'm thinking as roles evolve, right? Maybe somebody's on one team, they move to another team. It used to be appropriate for them to have a permission. Now it's not anymore. I think that tool would help you catch that, if I'm understanding correctly.
Yeah, I mean, it's a shift left guardrail.
Exactly.
For applying identity policies, and we haven't really seen that historically in a way that was one. I think it's huge that it's free and it's very you can just use those APIs, and two, you can just build it into your CI/CD process, and it only returns true or false. So pass fail, very easy for a lot of people to write that logic and reject dangerous changes.
Yeah, exactly. But just a quick note on what Jim was describing with the Datadog CHIM tool. Is that the pronunciation we've landed on? We can attest to you that it works quite well, because Jim and I are both pretty knowledgeable about AWS IAM, I would like to think. And what we learned when we started using that Datadog tool was, even in our own development environment, it alerted us right away to several roles. we had overscope. So if we were in production, it would have saved us from a lot of heartache. So it was awesome to get to learn how to use that a little bit.
Yeah, it's a very cool tool. It's actually part of the cloud security management product, so it's not broken out as its own thing. It's just in the same place that you see all the other findings, and I think that's really great as well.
It really helps you when you're prototyping and like testing things, because a lot of the times you'll just be like, I'll just give it a star for now and I'll fix it later, and then you forget to fix it later, and then the tool's like, hey, you have this problem here, which is really nice.
Yeah.
I feel like this year, just kind of changing gears a bit, I'm always looking for like a serverless announcement or like a big, run more workloads in a serverless way. And I did not see a big serverless announcement this year. So, I think that AWS Lambda and serverless offerings are kind of here to stay the way that they have been for a long time. But we did see two really exciting announcements. I think that they were technically pre-invent announcements, but one of the big ones was Lambda can export open telemetry now. So inside of the Lambda runtime, you can just get straight OTel out of those, and that's a pretty exciting announcement.
Nice.
The other announcement that I'm really excited about is that we released our application security management product for AWS Lambda, which gives you the same capabilities that you have everywhere else. And I think as a customer, that's always the expectation, right? So if you have a security tool, you expect to be able to use it in every place in your infra. So really nice to see that that's available now for Lambda workloads, because you can do things like block, you can do the vulnerability management, and then of course for any other telemetry, you can either use APM in serverless or you can use those OTel exports now, which is really neat.
I'm really excited about that too. I think the blocking functionality is super cool and very useful. And one of the other things I really think is cool about ASM for Lambda is if you're already monitoring your Lambda functions in Datadog, the ease with which you can just add that ASM security on top of it. It's very simple to do in the Datadog UI. So that's, I think, a great addition.
Yeah, I think in serverless sometimes, because it is like kind of a no maintenance option, the danger is if it's not broke, you don't change the fundamental way that it works. And prior to having these OTel exports and all these additional capabilities in Datadog, like the Lambda extension that we make, the way that people did emit traces in serverless was they actually just appended the trace to the end of the log.
No.
And we would pick that trace up from CloudWatch and ingest it, which is, that's a way to get APM traces into a platform like Datadog, but really, really nice to see these native integrations now, because, if you have to have all your traces flow through CloudWatch, that's gonna cost you.
I don't know, just quickly, I don't know if this would if you would consider this a big serverless announcement at reInvent, but one of the most underrated reInvent announcements so far, in my humble opinion, is step function support for HTTP endpoints. So I don't know if you all have seen that yet, but I think that's very cool. And I monitor. I really like step functions. I'm a huge step function nerd, and I monitor a lot of them in Datadog. So I'm kind of just interested to see what lambdas I can replace just simply with a step in my step function. So, I feel like I haven't heard enough people hyping that up yet.
I actually had not heard about that announcement yet. So thanks for that, Tara. But I have a question about that, which is I thought it's blowing my mind to think about that, because isn't the response limit on an HTTP endpoint Lambda function 60 seconds?
Yeah, I was reading a little bit about that just this morning, and I don't want to give any incorrect information, but in some of their announcement blogs, there is some discussion of that, and also how authentication is working with some of your endpoints, and it was pretty interesting. Yes. So I think they added HTTPS endpoints and then a test state that's going to improve your ability to test and fail without having your whole step function fail.
Yeah, super curious to see more information on that. I have something I need to look up after this is over. Again, if you have a cool theme from reInvent, if you have a question, if you want to share an announcement with us, throw that in the YouTube chat. It actually looks like we have a ton of viewers on the live stream with us. Not many folks in the chat. So the secret is, by the way, if you want to chat with us, you just have to subscribe to that Datadog HQ YouTube channel, and then you can drop comments in the chat, and we'll of course see them and respond. So yeah, it blows my mind to think about step functions for HTTP endpoints. Because when I think of step functions, I think of asynchronous workflows, and request response is definitely not async.
Yeah, well, I think the general idea, and this is certainly what will be useful for me, is if you're tired of just writing more Lambda functions than you can remove that step of writing a Lambda function to make your HTTPS request. You can just do it right in the flow of your state machine. But like I say, I haven't tried it yet, so that's what I'm really excited. I'm excited to get in there and see how it works in implementation.
Yeah, we've seen that before with a Lambda scope creep, where you end up with 10,000 Lambdas to do a couple things. So that's pretty cool.
Of course, we study that in the Datadog State of Serverless report every year, and there's some cool trend data in there on, or at least 2 years ago, there was trend data in there on monolithic functions versus highly distributed functions. We won't turn this into a serverless webinar, but we can talk for hours about serverless architectures. But also on the serverless side, I know it's not a Lambda function or AWS Lambda related announcement, but I consider personally S3 to be a serverless service in AWS. In fact, it's probably the original serverless service.
Oh, gee.
Yeah, to how we all define that stuff. And I was really excited and did not maybe understand at first how significant this is, but Amazon S3 Express One Zone launched, of course, at reInvent, which is a brand new class of S3 storage. And I'm curious what both of you think about the Express One Zone. Why is it significant? Of course, we published a blog post on an integration that we launched for this to monitor it. But I think that there's some pretty significant things that this says about the way that people are using S3 and how heavily they depend on S3.
If I'm understanding, go ahead, Tara.
Oh, are you sure? Well, I was just going to say one interesting thing is, and you guys correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe this is the first time you can choose what availability zone your bucket is going to live in, right? So that's pretty big, and it'll be interesting to see. That'll be, I think, useful for some customers' use cases. And then I also believe, and I don't know if this is a first or not, but I believe S3 Express One Zone has gotten its own. It kind of has a separate tab in the S3 console, so that's a little bit new too. So it seems like this is really standing out as a different level of S3 launch, kind of.
Yeah, for those situations when you need like really low latency, you want to make sure the workloads are existing in the same AZ, so you can maintain that low latency.
Yeah.
It seems super helpful.
Yeah, you've always been able to set the bucket location constraint on bucket create, but it was limited to a region. It was never forgot to pick the AZ. I wonder from a service discovery perspective now if we need like an intermediate layer of middleware that monitors where the Express One Zone buckets are, and then it tells the workload which bucket, like, because let's say that you're building a cache or something at edge, or you're serving content, that you need to be super low latency. Now all of a sudden, do I have to start to account for bucket AZ combos and monitor that so that I'm not crossing AZs VPC?
That sounds like a good Datadog monitor. Like, your computer's in the wrong AZ, move it.
Yeah. So, here's a question that I actually don't know if anybody knows the answer to on this from the chat. Do we know when fleet automation will be available? I think we're going to have to get back to you on that, unless do either of you know about fleet automation?
I know a little bit about it, but I don't know when it's going to be available.
Okay. So thanks for the question. We'll get back to you after the event. So so no worries there. So on the also on the monitoring side, we also released a monitoring feature for Bedrock. You know, because we talked a little bit about AI LLM announcements, but I think one of the things that nobody ever thinks about with these is, you know, just because it's no code or low code doesn't mean that we don't have to observe it. And monitoring for Bedrock was also released very recently for Datadog, inside Datadog. So we have dashboards for this now, which would both monitor the performance of the model, but then they also can monitor the jobs, like the actual ingest jobs. So that's pretty cool. I personally have never built on top of any of this, but I am familiar with some of the classical problems that are described in this post, like throttling exceptions. You know, and that's something like retry logic is such a huge part of these large distributed jobs.
Yeah, and just in general, kind of to some of the larger themes and points, as you're talking about Bedrock as an example of something that's super accessible to maybe folks who don't have as much of that coding background or cloud background. And just in general, as we see more of that, monitoring becomes more and more important, right? Because you might have all sorts of different folks touching things, deploying things in your environment. I mean, hopefully you have some controls in place to keep that safe in the way that you want to, but that's where security monitoring, observability just becomes more and more critical, right? As we are inviting as many people as we can into build, making it as easy to do so, we want to make sure we have some guardrails and some detection if something has gone awry.
Yeah, it's when maybe you have a data scientist that's not, you know, super versed on the ops side, and we'll make sure that they're doing things correctly, like you mentioned with like retries and things like that. It might not be something that, you know, inherently pops into their head. So like having that stuff built in, super nice. Just automated, you know, don't have to worry about it.
Yeah, I think retries don't pop into most people's heads. And I think the first time I ever encountered this was actually as a security engineer writing automated incident response tools. You know, you don't, so there are two things in Boto 3 that I don't think are advertised enough as features that are part of the SDK. And by the way, they're in all the other SDKs. They're not just in Python offering. One is the retry logic it's built in to all the AWS SDKs, where you can just, for a lot of the functions, you can do dot retry. The other one is waiters. And if you're not familiar with what a waiter is, it's just the ability to sit there and wait for the API to stop returning errors. And you run into this in large environments all the time. You know, if you have too many describe calls, or you're hitting a service limit, or you have an event storm from scaling out. And I don't think it's often talked enough about or put in enough reference examples that people just aware that the SDK has these great built-in features.
Oh yeah.
But also a lot of people just aren't writing native integrations using the SDK these days.
And I think that two SDKs dropped at reInvent, right? The Rust SDK, isn't that new? I think that was new at reInvent.
That's pretty new, yeah.
Yeah. I'm super excited about that, because, you know, the open source alternative, well, great, didn't always have support for new things. You know, there was quite a lag in the Risotto project, which you had to use prior. So really nice to see Rust becoming a first-class citizen as far as AWS SDKs are concerned.
It earned it. It deserves it.
I know there's a lot of Rustations at AWS, a growing number of Rustations out there. And I think in every company, as we all try to optimize performance, and you know, the Rust threading model is just so nice. What's the other SDK, Tara? Do you know?
Let me look it up, because I don't want to get it wrong. I know Rust for sure. I'll get back to you.
Okay, we got a comment in the chat from somebody that's not a question, that just says, I use Datadog all the time. It's very in-depth and it blows my mind. Some love from the audience.
During the game day when we had the Datadog challenge, we had one team that finished it in like 15 minutes because they're Datadog customers, and I walked over and they were asking me a question. I'm like, "Wait, you're done? What's going on?" Like, it blew my mind. Like, it was super awesome.
They were like prodigies. It was wild.
Yeah, they were super enthusiastic about about Datadog in general, using it to solve the game day challenges. Like, it was nice.
And so moving on here, I know we talked a little bit about developer experience at the beginning of this. I'm not sure everybody that's on the stream knows what Code Whisperer even is, but I was really excited about the command line Code Whisperer integration that launched. And if you haven't heard about that, it's actually a bash integration for the shell now that will suggest from 300 different utilities, not just AWS utilities, what command you should use.
Huh.
It provides IntelliSense-like functionality, so like the same thing that you would get in Visual Studio Code, right in the terminal.
That's going to be such a time saver for me.
Oh yeah. Yeah, that goes back to what you mentioned about like IAM policies all being different across services. Like, it can sometimes be the same with the verbs at the AWS command line, So
True.
like having something to fill that out for you is super nice.
Yeah.
Very true.
So the other thing though about that blew my mind is that if you don't, let's say you don't even know the command line tool that you want to start with, can use you can hop out into a natural language prompt and you can type the 1-sentence version of what it is you want to do, and then it will tell you what the right command line tool is to achieve that task.
That's amazing.
I find this exciting and also maybe terrifying.
What aspect of it terrifies you, Andrew?
Well, if it's wrong, and we know that often people operate in these overly permissive developer roles. They operate on a daily basis without the right guardrails in place. I can just imagine, typing some intent into a project, and the command that you get out the other side absolutely does not do the thing that you think it's going to do, and then you just hit enter. That's sounds like security issues to me.
Yeah.
Right, because as anyone who's working with these generative AI tools know, if it's wrong, it will be confidently wrong. So you have to have enough knowledge to kind of keep it in check.
Yeah, you're right about percentage of the time.
Yeah.
And for generating normal code that you're just going to run in like user space, or it's going to be an API and it's going to be code reviewed, no issues there. But when we start to talk about security stuff, or generating firewall rules, or things that we would consider sensitive, I don't think that anybody has a good solution to how to gut check those things.
Yeah.
And also to know, 5 years from now, after we have all these command line blocks or tutorials that are written with output from tools like this, what has been suggested by a person and what has been suggested by a model.
Yeah, that's true.
A lot of the layers are good. Like, yes, you ask for like an on policy to do something, but then maybe you don't fully understand it. But then now you have tools you can use to double check that it's good to go.
Yeah.
It's an interesting time if you think about that. There's going to be a point in the security ecosystem where we are trying to produce tools that can detect whether it is an AI generated suggestion or a human generated suggestion. And the two outputs are almost indistinguishable sometimes, most of the time.
Yeah, I can see where that could be easier with text, but when you're looking at code blocks, like what's to say that like how difficult can that possibly be? Like,
yeah.
Yeah,
we're gonna have to train AIs to tell us if our code block was written by an AI or not.
Yeah.
Too bad it's not like AI generated images, where it's very easy to tell because the hands are so strange. We don't have anything like that for code yet.
It's a bit of an arms race. The best analogy that I heard was from Ed Scotus that was about non-radioactive steel. I don't know if either of you are familiar with non-radioactive steel, but
before the 40s,
yeah, prior to the advent of the atomic bomb, all steel was not radioactive, and so for sensitive instruments like things that we put in space or things that need to have really, really sensitive sensors. But today, what they have to do if they want to make non-radioactive steel is they actually go and they pull up a shipwreck and smelt down all the bolts.
Wow.
And that's the only way that we can get it. And that's kind of where we're at with AI generated content. Is the only way to know 100% certain that something was generated by a person is to go back from before the LLM boom. And that's the window of time that we can be confident about. And
That's wild. Well, it looks like maybe another kind of cool question here in the chat. What about Code Whisperer versus GitHub Copilot? Anyone have thoughts on that?
I can't speak really about Copilot because I haven't used it, but I recently started using Code Whisperer, and one thing I noticed that it's super great at is like documentation in my code. So like I was writing some Python code and I started typing the docs, and it filled out like a whole block of like all the parameters that I have, like returns, and it made really good suggestions on what to use, and it surprised me because I hate write documentation. I'm sure I'm not the only person in the world that does, and it just spit it out for me. It's like, that's really nice.
Nice.
The integration was super smooth too. Like I used VS Code for everything, and it was just like an instant integration.
Nice.
I also have not used Copilot. Admittedly, I've also not used Code Whisperer, but I think all these things are kind of trying to achieve the same thing, right? Which is that they're trying to assist the standard generation of code. I think the risk of all these tools is that we're going to end up with a lot of code that looks the same, which is not so. You could fall into two schools of thought there. That is code that is more homogeneous is easier to maintain if you have a really strong code culture. But also, I know one of the things that I enjoyed when I was an engineer is making something that was really creative and different than the way that everybody else on the team built something. And I would bring in, like a new object model or a new design pattern. And, it's probably that person that you hated later on. It's like, why the heck would you bring in another design pattern to this project? It's like, well, maybe I was bored that day, but there needs to be some room for creativity.
Oh yeah, if you look back to like when IntelliSense was like first introduced, and I'm pretty old, but like people made the same arguments back then, like, oh, it's going to homogenize code, but like the human element, that creativity is always going to be there, like, and the computer's just there to like help you along, maybe, like, but I don't think that like that overall problem solving, like that human element, I don't think that's ever going to go away.
Yeah, this conversation is kind of reminding me of another reInvent announcement I was excited about, and I haven't tried it yet, so I'll be excited to give everyone my review once I get my hands on it. But Application Composer being available in your IDE now, so in VS Code, as you're writing your infrastructure as code. I'm not sure what all it supports, but definitely CloudFormation and I think CDK. Your IDE can visualize for you your solution architecture. So as you're adding resources, your architecture evolves. And that kind of tooling has existed in the AWS console, but I believe having this as a VS Code extension and IDE in your IDE is a first. So I'm really excited to try that out. I write a lot of infrastructure as code, and it's looked aesthetically, it looked beautiful on the slide. It looked so visually appealing. So that's another one I'm excited about. We haven't hit on yet.
Oh yeah, I always go into the console, into CloudFormation, and the I can't think of the name of it, but where you put your code in, and then it'll draw it out for you, and then it'll check your your syntax and all that. So like having that right in the IDE is a time saver.
We're so dangerously close to being able to have a security finding and then describe the intent and then have the fix generated and pull requested back to CI. And I think that's the that's the world that I would like to live in, you know, where if there is auto-generated output, it's 100% like back through the CI/CD pipeline with like plus one approvers. But all these no code tools that are generating IIC are super exciting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and one other thing I saw that I think will be really useful is some new tooling where as you're moving in the console, and this has existed from some homegrown tools built in the community before, but AWS now has dropped something new where as you're moving in the console, making modifications, doing whatever you're doing, the AWS console can generate your code block for you to mimic what you just did manually with ClickOps, right? So the idea being, as we all know, hopefully when you're managing things with infrastructure as code, you're not making any manual changes, but things happen. Sometimes it's tempting when the button's right there when you're troubleshooting something. So now the console is going to help keep you in check and give you your code. You can go back and plug into your template. So I think that's a good development as well.
That's nice. Yeah. Usually when I'm working on automating something, I do it manually first. So if something's following along, like documenting the steps, that'll save time.
Yeah, that'll be great for game day development because we wrote a lot of infrastructure as code for our game day, and Jim learned just how limited my natural YAML instincts are for CloudFormation.
YAML's awful, but as a human, JSON is worse.
I was going to ask, would you prefer JSON? Like what?
No, I prefer all these awesome new tools that are rolling out to just prevent me from having to learn.
Yeah, having to do either, yeah.
The intermediate form has to be something. Well, we're just coming up on time here, and it doesn't look like we have tons of questions left in the chat. Lots of hellos, but that sort of brings us to a close. We're just about out of announcements that we wanted to recap with you. Of course, we have the AWS reInvent recap blog post that just published less than 1 hour ago, so you can go and check out all the exciting Datadog announcements there, along with kind of our hot takes on what happened at reInvent. And I just want to thank Jim and Tara for being here today on the live stream.
Thanks for having me.
Yes. Thank you so much for having us. And I just want to mention, so just because I feel really silly, I couldn't think of the name earlier when I was talking about the new cost optimization hub in the AWS console, just so everyone knows, it's called Cost Optimization Hub. So if you're looking for it, that's what you can go look for. And I didn't find the other SDK announcement I had in mind, but maybe we could add it to the show notes later or something like that. And other than that, it's been awesome. It's been a pleasure. So thanks, Andrew, for having us.
All right. Well, we'll see y'all on the next live stream, and thanks for joining us today.